Caleb Brandt rode with the sun at his back, which meant it was already past 9 in the morning. He hated this. He hated the ride, the town, and the business that waited for him. The alkali dust of the Wyoming Territory was a fine, white powder that coated his tongue and grit his teeth. It was a land of harsh truths, and he was riding into Sweetwater Crossing to face one. The town was barely a town. It was a collection of raw timber buildings huddled around a muddy track that pretended to be a main street, a saloon, a mercantile, and the preacher's combined chapel and land office. It was a place men passed through on their way to somewhere better, or a place they ended up when better had run out. Caleb had ended up here. He bypassed the saloon. The smell of stale beer and desperation was already thick in the air. He tied his horse, Ahab, to the hitching post outside the chapel. The wood was so new it was still yellow. Reverend Josiah Mills was waiting inside. He was a small man, bird-like, with spectacles too large for his face. He looked constantly nervous. A man built for shaded libraries in Boston, not the high, raw plains. His office was cramped, smelling of paper and dried ink. "Caleb, you came," Mills said, wiping his palms on his black trousers. "I said I would." Caleb's voice was rust, torn from disuse. He took off his hat, slapping the white dust from it against his thigh. Yes, of course." The preacher fiddled with a stack of papers on his desk. "The arrangement is finalized. The contract is here, the fee for the arrangement, the transportation. It has all been paid by her sponsors in the East." "And the stage?" Caleb asked, his eyes drifting to the window. "Due by noon, the high stage from Cheyenne." Mills stopped, his hands fluttering. He pushed his glasses up. "Caleb, I must impress upon you the delicacy of this situation. The woman, she is not what you might expect." Caleb finally looked at the man. "I expect a signature. Reverend, I expect a wife who draws breath. The Land Commission requires a family presence by the 1st of October. That is 3 weeks." "I understand your position. Believe me." Mills's voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper. "Angus McPherson was in here just yesterday, asking about your claim. He knows the deadline. He is pressing the commissioner hard." Caleb's jaw tightened. McPherson, his neighbor to the west, the one with too many cattle and not enough water, the one who wanted Caleb's Creek. McPherson can press all he likes. The law says a family claim holds preference. "Which brings us back to the bride," Mills said, his gaze dropping to the papers. "The agency in Baltimore. They were very clear. She is, shall we say, a woman of specific circumstance. She carries burdens." "Burdens." "She is described as plain unwanted by their measure." The preacher licked his lips. "She agreed to this placement, to come to the territory sight unseen, because, frankly, there were no others. They implied she needs protection. Caleb, they stressed that she is different." Caleb grunted. He was not interested in her burdens. He had enough of his own. He had a 300-acre ranch that he had carved out of sagebrush and stone with his own hands. He had built the cabin, dug the well, and strung the fences. He had lost one life in the war. He would not lose this one to a land-greedy neighbor and a bureaucratic deadline. "It is a business transaction, Reverend," Caleb said, pulling the contract closer. "I am buying a wife to hold my land. She is buying a name and a home to escape whatever she is running from. We both get what we need. Where do I sign?" Mills pointed a trembling finger. "Here and here." Caleb picked up the pen. The ink was thick. He signed Caleb Brandt with a few sharp, angry strokes. Beside it, waiting, was the name of the woman he had just purchased. Lily Ashcroft. It was a delicate name, a name that did not belong in this country. It did not matter. He pushed the papers back. "I'll wait for the stage." He left the chapel and stood on the boardwalk, leaning against a post. He rolled a cigarette, the dry tobacco flaking over his fingers. He was buying a woman sight unseen, A woman so different and unwanted that her only option was to be shipped west like freight, married to a reclusive rancher known for his temper and his silence. It suited him. He was a man no one wanted either. The stage arrived at 12:30, a cloud of dust before it was a sound. Then a rattling, groaning carriage pulled by 4 exhausted mules. The driver, a man Caleb knew only as Stumpy, threw down the mailbag and a single battered trunk. A few onlookers, the blacksmith, 2 drunk miners from the saloon, watched with lazy curiosity. Stumpy opened the carriage door. "End of the line, ma'am." A woman emerged backward, her movements careful, as if her limbs ached. She was tall, but seemed small, wrapped in a gray traveling cloak that had seen far too many miles. Her face was completely obscured by a heavy, dark green veil attached to a plain, brown bonnet. She held a small, worn satchel in one gloved hand. She did not look up. She just stood by the carriage, a still, gray figure in the relentless, baking sun. Caleb pushed off the post. His boots were loud on the dry dirt. He stopped a few feet from her. "Mrs. Brandt." The veiled head snapped up. He could see her body tense, a vibration of fear that ran right through her. "I am Caleb Brandt," he said. The words tasted like ash. "I am your husband." She gave a short, sharp nod. Her hand tightened on the satchel. He turned, grabbed her trunk. It was heavier than it looked, bound with rope. He loaded it onto the back of his farm wagon, which he'd left tied near the mercantile. He turned back. She had not moved. She looked like a bird waiting for the hawk. "We have a long ride," he said. His voice was softer than he intended. He motioned to the wagon. He was a gentleman, or had been one, once. He offered his hand to help her up to the high seat. She recoiled. It was not a small movement. She gasped, a small, choked sound, and stumbled backward, as if he had tried to strike her. The movement, the flinch, caught the wind just right. The veil was not tied down. It lifted, fluttering sideways for 1/2 second. A green flag swept aside. Caleb Brandt froze. His hand, offered in courtesy, remained suspended in the air. It was not the face of a stranger. It was not the plain woman the preacher had warned him about. It was a face he knew, a face he had last seen illuminated by fire, pale with terror, in a Virginia manor house more than 10 years ago. The face was changed, ruined. The left side, from the temple down to the jaw, was a disaster of scar tissue. It was puckered, silvered, and pulled the corner of her eye and mouth into a permanent, pained grimace. But it was her, Lily, the girl from Ashcroft Hall. He stopped breathing. The world went silent, just the ringing in his ears, the same ringing that had started the night that house burned, the night he had followed an order he would regret forever. It was not possible. She was supposed to be dead, or married, or anywhere but here, in Sweetwater Crossing, veiled and purchased. She quickly pulled the veil down, her gloved hands fumbling with the cloth. But she had seen his stillness. She looked at him, properly, for the first time, her one good eye, a deep, terrified blue he remembered, searched his face. There was no recognition. Of course there was not. He was not the clean-shaven 22-year-old Union soldier who had shared a canteen of water with her on a hot afternoon, just hours before the raid. He was 33, but he looked 50. He was gaunt. His beard was thick and untrimmed. A scar from a Confederate saber cut through his left eyebrow, giving him a permanent scowl. The war had burned the boy out of him, leaving this cold shell. He was a stranger to her. She was a ghost to him. He dropped his hand. "Ma'am," he said, his voice a rasp. He cleared his throat. "The sun is high. We must go." He turned away, unable to look at her, and climbed onto the wagon seat. He did not offer his hand again. She scrambled up beside him, clutching her satchel, keeping a stark, deliberate foot of distance between them. He snapped the reins, and the wagon lurched forward, leaving the town behind. The ride to the ranch was 4 hours of brutal silence. The wagon wheels screamed against the axles, a sound that matched the tension in Caleb's shoulders. The wind picked up, cutting across the open plains, carrying grit that stung his eyes. He kept his gaze fixed between Ahab's ears. He could feel her beside him. She was rigid, holding the seat iron with both hands, bracing against every jolt. He wanted to ask, "What happened to you?" He wanted to shout, "Do you not know me?" He said nothing. The past was dead. He had buried it in Georgia, in Andersonville, and in the bitter years since. He would not dig it up. This was a contract. This woman, this Lily, was not the girl he remembered. The girl he remembered was soft, naive, and had smiled at him. This woman was a piece of legal paper. But it was her. God help him, it was her. They passed the line of his property, marked by a low stone fence he had spent a year building, rock by back-breaking rock. The land was not barren. Not to him. It was hard. It was honest. It asked everything of a man and gave back just enough to survive. But he saw it now through her eyes. The endless gray sagebrush, the dry creek bed, the oppressive, empty sky. It was a prison. His cabin sat low on a rise, built of sod and timber, with a single stone chimney. It was not a home. It was a shelter, small, functional, and utterly solitary. Far to the west, maybe 5 miles, a single plume of smoke rose from the chimney of the McPherson place. They were his nearest neighbors. They were his enemies. They would see the wagon. They would see her. They would know he had met the deadline. They would be suspicious. They would wonder what kind of woman would marry Caleb Brandt. He pulled the wagon up. "We're here." She looked at the cabin. He saw her shoulders slump, just a fraction, beneath the cloak. He got down, unloaded her trunk, and carried it inside, kicking the door open. The cabin was one room, a cold iron stove, a rough-hewn table, 2 chairs, a rope bed in the far corner, a wash basin on a stand. It was meticulously clean, swept bare, but empty of comfort, empty of life. She stepped inside, her boots shuffling on the wood floor. She kept the veil down. She stood in the center of the room, still holding her satchel, looking like she might bolt. "The bed is yours," he said, gesturing with his head. She turned to him. "And you?" Her voice was a whisper, rough with disuse and dust. "I have my bedroll. I'll take the floor by the stove." She gave another of those sharp, short nods. She moved to the trunk, which he had set at the foot of the bed. She placed her small satchel on top of it and stood there, her back to him, as if waiting for a command. "There's water in the bucket," he said, grabbing his rifle from its pegs by the door. "Wood in the box. I'll see to the stock." He left. He needed air. He needed the wind to clear the smell of smoke and memory from his head. He curried Ahab until the horse stamped in protest, then fed the 2 milk cows and the chickens. He stayed out until the sun bled red and purple over the western ridge, until the air grew teeth. Night fell fast, the high plains dark, swallowing the light whole. When he came back inside, the cabin was cold. She had not moved, but she had lifted her veil. She was still standing by the trunk, her back to him. He saw her scarred hands grip the edge of it. "I'll make supper," he said. He moved around the small space with practiced efficiency. He lit the lamp, the yellow glow pushing back the shadows. He sliced salt pork into a pan, stirred cornmeal into a pot of water over the stove. The smell of cooking food filled the silence, a grotesque mockery of domesticity. He set a tin plate on the table. "Eat." She turned. Her face was fully visible in the lamplight. She kept the scarred side turned away from him, toward the wall. She sat, her movements stiff. They ate without a word. The only sound was the scrape of forks on tin plates and the relentless wind howling around the eaves. He watched her. She ate slowly, deliberately, as if chewing was painful. or as if she had not eaten a full meal in a very long time. He was drawn to the fire of her presence, the sheer, impossible fact of her. He also wanted her gone. He wanted the stranger he had paid for, the plain woman. He did not want this specter from a life he had murdered and buried. When they were finished, he took the plates to the wash basin. She moved to the bed. She did not undress. She pulled the thin blanket up, still wearing her traveling clothes, and lay down, facing the sod wall. Caleb checked the lock on the door, a heavy bolt he had installed himself. He banked the stove so the fire would hold but not overheat the room. He laid out his bedroll near the hearth, as far from her as he could get. He kept his rifle close. He lay in the dark, listening. The cabin was alive with sound, the creak of the wood as the temperature dropped, the whistle of the wind finding every crack, and beneath it, her breathing, shallow, then steady. He must have slept. The sound that woke him was a sharp intake of breath. He was instantly awake, hand on his gun, muscles rigid. It was her. She was crying in her sleep. Not a loud sob, but a choked, whimpering sound, a sound of absolute terror. "No," she whispered. "Please, stop. The smoke. Please, not the fire." Caleb sat up. The fire in the stove cast a low, red glow across the floor. He saw her body, rigid under the blanket. The sound, the word smoke, threw him back. He was not in Wyoming. He was in Virginia, the air thick with summer humidity and the smell of gunpowder. He was 22, his blue uniform sticking to his back. He was pushing through a burning doorway. A woman's scream, high and sharp. Betrayal. The face of his commanding officer, Captain Wells, smiling, his eyes drunk, the smell of whiskey and lamp oil. And her face, Lily's face, untouched then, looking at him with desperate hope as he and his squad were ordered out. "Leave her. Brant, we have what we came for. Let it burn. The order, the betrayal, the fire." He blinked, and the memory receded, leaving the cold sweat on his neck. He looked at the woman in his bed, the girl he had failed to save. She cried out again, a muffled sound, and then went silent, her breathing ragged, catching in her throat. He laid his head back down on his saddle, but he did not sleep. The tension in the cabin was a living thing. He wanted distance. He wanted to build a wall of stone around this cabin and keep the world out. But he was drawn to her, to the broken, familiar thing that had just landed in his life. He was drawn to the fire. The morning was gray and cold. He was up before dawn, stoking the stove and boiling coffee. The smell of it filled the room. When she rose, she moved like an old woman, her joints stiff. She went to the wash basin, her back to him. He heard the quiet splash of water. When she turned, the veil was back in place. "I'll be out," he said, pulling on his heavy coat. "Checking the north fence. The McPherson's cattle have been pushing through." She just nodded. "There is food in the larder. Dried apples, cornmeal. Do not go outside without the rifle." "I know how to shoot," she whispered. He paused, his hand on the door latch. He looked at her, this veiled mystery that was not a mystery at all. He left. Lily waited until the sound of his horse faded completely. The silence of the cabin was terrifying. She was a prisoner here, married to a hard, silent man who looked at her like she was a judgment. She moved to the small shelf near his bedroll. A few books, a Bible, a ledger, and the papers from the preacher, folded neatly. She pulled them out. She slipped off the gloves she always wore. Her hands were a mess of old burns. The skin was tight, glossy, and white, the knuckles stiff. She secretly read the land claim contract. Her fingers, awkward and stiff, traced the lines of ink. She was not a fool. She had been educated at a finishing school. She understood the legal terms. Conditional upon continued habitation and improvement by the claimant and his legal family. Any claim contested by Mr. Angus McPherson, and final review by the Land Commission due October 1st, 1874. She saw it all. She saw the date. She realized the truth. He had not bought her out of pity, or even base physical need. He had bought her to satisfy a line of text. He needed a legal family to hold his land. She was a piece of legal paper, nothing more. Her presence was his only defense against this McPherson. It was, she thought, the most honest transaction she had ever been a part of. It was better than the lies and whispers of Virginia. This was clear. This was survival. When Caleb returned hours later, chilled to the bone, he found her seated at the table. She had started a fire in the stove. The cabin was warm. She was mending one of his shirts, which he must have found in his trunk. She was not wearing her gloves. He stopped, stamping the cold from his boots. He had seen her face. He had not, until this moment, seen her hands. They were as ruined as her face, burned, the skin grafted and tight. She held the needle awkwardly, her fingers stiff, but her stitches were small and perfect. He watched her pull the thread, wincing at the pull of the damaged skin. He looked from her hands to her veiled face. She had been burned, badly, in the fire he had fled. He said nothing. He hung his coat on the peg, his heart a cold, heavy stone in his chest. He would not ask. He would not speak of it. The past was a grave, and he would not be the one to dig it up. They lived this way for 3 days, a silent truce. They worked. He chopped wood. She cleaned the cabin until it shone. She cooked. They moved around each other. 2 planets locked in a grim orbit. They never touched. They barely spoke. At night, he lay by the fire, listening to her quiet, sleeping breaths, waiting for the nightmares he knew would come. On the 4th day, he was splitting logs near the front of the cabin. The rhythmic thud of the axe a comfort. Lily was outside, hanging his mended shirts on a line he had strung between the cabin and a post. She was veiled, as always. He heard the horses before he saw them. 3 men, riders from the saloon in Sweetwater Crossing. He recognized them. Hank Rogers, a failed prospector with black teeth, and the 2 Tully brothers, who were known for being mean when drunk. They were drunk. They reined in their horses at the edge of his yard, staying just off his property. Well, well, Rogers slurred, spitting tobacco juice into the dust. Look here, the hermit's got himself a wife. Caleb set his axe down. Slowly. He did not reach for his gun. Not yet. Lily froze, her hands on the clothesline, a wet shirt clutched in her fingers. Heard you bought her, Brant! One of the Tully boys yelled, his voice high and cruel. Heard from the preacher she was specific. Show us her face, Brant! Rogers laughed, a wet, ugly sound. We heard you bought the monster bride, the one no one else would touch. Caleb started walking toward them. His vision narrowed. The world turned red at the edges. He wiped his hands on his trousers. What's under the veil, sweetheart? Rogers taunted, nudging his horse forward a step. Is it as bad as they say? Did he buy a pig in a poke? Is that why you keep her covered? Lily did not move. She did not lower her head. She did not cry. She simply stood, her back straight. As the words hit her, she had built a wall of ice around herself. And Caleb realized, in that moment, that wall was stronger than his sod house. She had heard this before. She had survived this before. Caleb stopped at the edge of his property line. He looked at the 3 men, his face impassive. He wanted to kill them. He wanted to pull Hank Rogers from his horse and break his neck with his bare hands. He wanted to silence the laughter with the barrel of his rifle. It was a cold, clean feeling, a familiar feeling, from the war. Get off my land, he said. His voice was quiet, but it cut through the wind. The men laughed, but it was nervous now. They knew Caleb Brant's reputation. They knew what he had done in the war, and what he had done to a claim jumper 2 years back. "Just being neighborly, Brant," Rogers mumbled, his horse shifting. "Now," Caleb said. The three men exchanged a look. They pulled their horses around, kicking up dust, and rode off, their laughter forced and high, fading as they spurred their horses toward town. Caleb stood there for a long minute, his hands clenched so tight his nails bit into his palms. He watched until they were small specks against the gray horizon. He turned back. Lily was still at the clothesline. She had not reacted. She simply went back to hanging the shirt, her burned, stiff fingers fumbling with the clothespin. He wanted to kill them. He wanted to say something to her, to apologize, to tell her. He did not know what. He turned, walked back to the woodpile, and picked up his axe. He split a thick log in half with one clean, violent strike. The wind changed in the night. It stopped being a knife and became a wall. Caleb woke in the dark, not to Lily's crying, but to a profound, suffocating silence. The wind was gone. He lit the lamp, his movements slow, and looked at the single window. It was no longer black. It was a solid, ghostly white. He unbolted the door and put his shoulder to it. It did not budge. He pushed harder, a grunt tearing from his chest, until the wood scraped open a foot. A wall of white powder cascaded onto the floor. It was still dark, the blue hour before dawn, but the snow was a light unto itself. It was deep, drifted high against the cabin's north-facing wall. The sky was not dark, but a low, thick gray, and flakes as big as his thumb were still falling. Not hard, but with a relentless, heavy purpose. He shut the door, bolting it against the pressure. Lily was sitting up in the bed, the blanket clutched to her chest. Her face was pale, the scarred side stark in the lamplight. She was not wearing the veil. She had stopped wearing it inside the cabin, a small concession to the shared space, though she always kept that side of her face turned toward the wall, away from him. "A storm," she whispered. "It's here," he said. He went to the stove, his movements economical. He shook the grate, added wood, and got the coffee pot going. "We are not going anywhere. Not today, maybe not for a week." Her good eye closed for a moment. He saw her swallow. This cabin, which had been a shelter, was now a cell, and they were in it together. The first day was a trial of silence. The world shrank to the four walls of the sod house. The only sounds were the crackle of the stove and the low, constant howl of the wind, which had returned with a vengeance. It was a high, thin scream that never stopped. Caleb rationed the wood. He brought in more from the lean-to, fighting the drifts that were already waist-deep. He tended the animals in the small, attached shed, battling the wind for the right to open and shut the door. The cows were restless, their breath pluming in the frigid air. Lily watched him. She cleaned what was already clean. She mended what was already mended. The tension was a living thing, a third person in the room. On the second morning, the wind was still screaming. The snow was a solid white sea, unbroken, swallowing the land. He came in from the shed, shaking a thick coat of ice from his hat. "The horses," he said, his voice raw from the cold. "Ahab is fine, but the mare is restless. She won't take hay from me." Lily stood from the table, where she had been sorting dried beans. "Let me try." He almost laughed. "She's half wild. She'll kick a wall down." "I am good with horses," she said. Her voice was quiet, but it was not a request. It was a statement. He looked at her frail form, her ruined hands. But there was something in her stance, a stillness he had mistaken for fear, that now looked like resolve. "Fine," he grunted. "She's in the end stall." He led the way into the shed. The air was warmer than outside, thick with the smell of animals and hay. The mare, a small dun he'd bought for the wagon, was exactly as he'd said. She was backed into the corner, her eyes white, her ears pinned flat. She kicked the partition wall, the wood cracking. Caleb stood back, his arms crossed. Lily did not approach the horse. She moved to the center of the small shed, unhooking her heavy cloak and hanging it on a peg. She was wearing a simple wool dress. She leaned against the opposite wall, her veiled head turned toward the mare, and she began to hum. It was not a tune he knew. It was a low, wordless sound, almost like the wind, but with a current of sadness in it. She just stood there, humming, for 5 minutes. 10. The mare stopped kicking. She snorted, her ears flickering. She took one step forward, then another. Lily slowly held out her gloved hand. She did not move toward the horse. She let the horse come to her. The mare stretched her neck, sniffed the wool glove, and then, impossibly, lipped at her palm. Lily kept humming. She stroked the horse's muzzle, then her forehead, her scarred, stiff fingers moving with a gentleness that seemed impossible. The mare's head dropped, her eyes softened. Caleb watched, his chest tight. He had seen horse whisperers, men who had a gift, but this was different. This was a shared language of broken things. After another moment, Lily picked up a handful of hay from the floor. She offered it. The mare ate from her hand. "She'll let you feed her now," Lily said, not looking at him. Caleb said nothing. He watched her for a moment longer, this woman of stark contradictions. Then he turned and went back into the cabin, his respect warring with a deep, unsettling curiosity. That night, the third night, the cold was a physical weight. The stove glowed red, but the corners of the room were rimmed with frost. They ate their supper of cornmeal mush and salt pork in silence, sitting at the small table. "It will get colder," he said, staring into his plate. "The wood won't last if this keeps up past the week." "We will manage," she said. He looked up, surprised at the word "we." They moved to the hearth, sitting on the floor, backs against the wall, feeding small sticks into the stove to conserve the logs. The lamp was low. The wind was a banshee. He reached for the poker to stir the coals. At the exact same moment, she reached for a piece of kindling near his foot. His hand, chapped and hard, brushed against her arm. It was nothing, a fraction of a second, but it was the first time they had touched since he had failed to help her into the wagon. A jolt went through him, hot and sharp, like a spark from the fire. He pulled his hand back as if he'd been burned. She flinched, pulling her arm tight to her body. The silence that followed was louder than the storm. He could smell her, a faint scent of lye soap, and something else, something clean and faintly sweet, like dried apples. It was a smell he had not realized was filling his cabin, the smell of a woman. He stared into the fire, his heart pounding a slow, heavy beat. He was acutely aware of her body, just 3 feet from his. He felt a deeply physical pull, a base, animal hunger that he had not felt in years, and it shamed him. He was not just a man. He was a man who knew her past. He felt like a vulture, drawn to her weakness. "I will take the bedroll," she said, her voice tight. She scrambled to her feet and moved to the bed, pulling the blanket up, turning her back to him. He stayed by the fire, angry at the cold, angry at the storm, and furious at himself. The next day, she was distant, the wall of ice rebuilt. She was cleaning his few belongings, stacking the ledger and the Bible. Tucked inside the ledger, she found it. A piece of charcoal-smudged paper, folded in 4. She opened it. It was a sketch, a rough drawing, but the hand was skilled. It was a portrait of a girl, no more than 18 or 19. She was beautiful, with soft hair, a gentle mouth, and wide, innocent eyes. She was wearing a dress of fine lace. Caleb came in from the shed, snow dusting his shoulders. He saw her holding it. He crossed the room in 2 strides and snatched it from her hand. "Do not touch my things!" His voice was a whip. She recoiled, her hands flying up to her veiled face. "Who is she?" Lily asked, her voice small. Caleb shoved the sketch back into the ledger. No one. She is beautiful, Lily whispered, a terrible broken note in her voice. She was a girl I knew before the war, he snapped. He did not know why he was so angry, only that her holding it felt like a violation. A cousin. She is dead. The lie came easily. It was a half-truth. The girl she had been was dead. This sketch was of Lily Ashcroft, drawn from his memory in the first lonely year on the ranch, a time when he was still haunted by the girl he had failed to save. Lily turned away from him. She said nothing else, but he saw her shoulders shaking. He had been cruel. He knew it. The truth was, he could not bear to look at the sketch and then look at the woman standing before him. The contrast was a judgment on him, on the world, on God. That night, the fifth night, she built up the fire. He was watching her, his mood dark. I once lived in a grand house, she said suddenly, her back to him. In Virginia. It had 20 rooms. We had gardens. I had a horse, a white mare. Caleb waited. We had carpets from France. We had parties every week. It seemed my father. He was an important man. She paused. I lost everything. He waited for her to say how, to say the word fire, to say scandal. She did not. She just stared into the flames. There is nothing left of it, or of me. This land is not Virginia, he said, his voice flat. It does not care what you were. It only cares what you can do. She turned, and in the firelight, he saw the glint of tears in her good eye. I can do very little. You are wrong, he said, more harshly than he intended. Later, as the storm seemed to reach a new, frantic peak, she retrieved her small, worn satchel. She took out a bundle of letters, tied with a blue ribbon that had faded to gray. He saw the elegant, sloped handwriting on the top one. It was a man's hand. She did not read them. She held them over the open stove grate, one by one. What are you doing? He asked. Burning ghosts, she whispered. He watched as she fed them to the fire. The paper curled, the ink blackening, turning to gray ash that floated up in the heat. She was methodical. She held the last one for a long time, then let it go. Caleb saw the relief in her shoulders as the last one vanished. He did not pry. He understood the need to burn a past that would not let you go. He had been trying to do the same thing for 10 years. On the 6th day, the wind stopped. The silence was absolute. A heavy blanket on the world, but the snow was still falling. A thick, wet snow that piled on the roof. And then he heard it, a drip. Drip, drip, drip. He looked up. A dark spot was forming on the timber beam above the bed. Water. Damn it, he hissed. The weight of the snow must have sprung a leak in the sod roof. If it soaked through, the whole section could collapse. Move the bed, he ordered. They dragged the heavy rope frame to the center of the room. The drip became a steady, thin trickle of icy water. I have to go up, he said. He pulled on his coat and boots. I have to clear it. He grabbed a shovel and climbed onto the shed roof, then pulled himself up onto the cabin's main roof. The snow was 4 feet deep, heavy and wet as a soaked blanket. It was treacherous. He began to shovel, throwing huge clouds of white powder over the side. The work was brutal. The air was thin and bit his lungs. He felt a sudden, sharp pain in his shoulder, a reminder of an old bullet wound. He heard the cabin door open. What do you need? She called up. The tarp, he yelled, his breath ragged. In the shed, and the hammer and nails. A few minutes later, she appeared at the edge of the roof, having climbed up the same way he did. She was wearing his spare coat, which drowned her, and her veil was tied down tight. She had the tarp under one arm and the tools in her gloved hand. Get back down, he ordered. It is not safe. You cannot do it alone, she said. She crawled across the snow-covered sod, her movements careful, and handed him the tools. Hold the tarp, he said, his voice tight with anger and exertion. "Hold it steady while I find the hole." He shoveled the last of the snow away from the leaking spot. The wind, which had been still, chose that moment to return. A sudden, violent gust that swept across the open ridge. Caleb was off balance. The wet sod beneath the snow was slick. His boot slipped. He fell backward, sliding toward the edge of the roof, his arms flailing. "Caleb!" He heard her scream his name. He was going to fall 10 feet into a drift, but with his bad shoulder, it would be a disaster. He felt a hand grab his wrist. It was her. She had thrown herself flat on the roof, her small weight digging into the snow, and she had caught him. Her grip was iron. He was stunned. He looked at her hand, the gloved, scarred hand that held his wrist. It was trembling from the strain, but it did not let go. "Pull," she gritted out. He used her grip for leverage, found purchase with his boot, and hauled himself back to safety. They knelt on the roof, breathing hard, the wind whipping around them. He stared at her. She had just saved him. This frail, broken woman had the strength of a mule. "I told you," she whispered, her voice shaking. "I am good with horses." He did not know what that meant, but he knew something had just broken, and it was not the roof. The distance between them, the ice, had cracked clean through. He patched the roof. They worked together, the wind howling, their hands numb. She held the tarp steady, handed him the nails. They were a team. When it was done, they climbed down, half frozen. Inside the cabin, the dripping had stopped. They shed their wet coats. Lily was shaking, her face pale. "Thank you," he said. The words felt foreign. She just nodded, moving to the stove. Her hands held out to the warmth. That night, the 7th night, the cabin felt different. The tension was still there, but it was changed. It was no longer cold. It was hot. He lay in his bedroll. She lay in the bed. The storm raged, but the roof held. He heard the sound, the whimper. She was crying in her sleep again. The same words. "No, the smoke! Please, stop!" He sat up. He looked at her, a knot in his stomach. He saw her face, contorted in a nightmare. The scarred side pulled tight. He saw the girl he had failed. He saw the woman who had just held his hand and kept him from falling. He did not think. He moved. He stood over the bed. He reached out, his hand rough, and touched her hair, brushing it back from her face. "Lily," he whispered. She cried out, a small, choked sound. He did not know what else to do. He felt a desperate, crushing need to silence the ghosts that haunted her, the ghosts he had helped create. He leaned down, and he kissed her. It was not a gentle kiss. It was clumsy, desperate. His beard was rough against her skin. He kissed her mouth, the good side. Her eyes snapped open. She was awake. She was looking right at him. Her good eye was wide, filled with a mixture of terror and something else, confusion. He froze, expecting her to scream, to hit him. She did not. She just lay there, trembling, looking at him. Her lips, which he had just kissed, were parted. She did not push him away. That was all it took. The fact that she did not resist, combined with the week of forced proximity, the accidental touch, the memory of her hand in his, it all shattered his control. He felt a wave of guilt, sharp and sick, but it was drowned by a wave of raw, lonely desire. He had been alone for so long. He kissed her again, and this time, it was deeper. He tasted the salt of her tears. He moved his hand from her hair to her shoulder, his thumb tracing the line of her collarbone. She was so thin. He felt the trembling in her whole body. He pulled the blanket back. He was still fully dressed. She was in her thin chemise. "Caleb," she whispered. It was a plea, but for what? He did not know. For him to stop, or for him to continue. He did not care. He was ashamed, but he was drowning. He lay down on the bed beside her, his body pressing against hers. He felt her flinch, but still, she did not fight. It was a raw, tentative night. It was not love. It was barely passion. It was two ghosts clinging to each other in a storm. His hands were rough. Her body was stiff. When he touched her scarred side, she wept, silent tears that ran into her hair. He felt a profound guilt, a sense in which he was violating her all over again, just as those men had in Virginia. But he could not stop. He needed this. He needed to feel something other than the cold. And she let him. She was passive, trembling, her hands balled into fists at her side. It was a joining of guilt and shame, a desperate, fumbling act in the dark. When it was over, he pulled away from her, rolling to the edge of the bed. He did not touch her again. He listened to her quiet, broken sobs in the dark, and he had never felt more like a monster. The morning light was gray and unforgiving. The storm had broken. The world outside was a brilliant, blinding white. The sky a sharp, clean blue. The silence was complete. Caleb rose from the bed. He felt sick. Lily was turned away from him, her body rigid. He did not speak. He dressed, stoked the fire, and made coffee. He felt her sit up behind him. He heard the rustle of her clothes. When he turned, she was standing by the table, fully dressed, her bonnet on, the thick green veil hiding her face completely. She was his wife, the stranger. Again, the wall was back, higher and thicker than ever. "Lily," he started. He did not know what he would say. "I am sorry. It will not happen again." She did not look at him. "I will see to the chickens," she whispered. She grabbed his heavy coat, the one that was too big for her, and fled the cabin, slamming the door. Caleb stood alone in the quiet room. He was deeply, terribly ashamed. He had not wanted a wife. He had needed one, and now he had taken her, this broken woman. In a moment of weakness, he had wanted her, and his wanting felt like a sin. He went to the door, pulling on his own coat, intending to go after her. To what? He stopped. A rider. Someone was coming. A single man on a tall black horse, picking his way through the massive drifts, following the smoke from their chimney. The man was a stranger, bundled in furs, a heavy rifle slung across his back. He rode with a purpose. He was not a neighbor. Caleb stepped onto the porch, his hand moving to the Colt holstered at his hip. The stranger stopped 20 yards from the cabin. He raised one gloved hand. "Caleb Brandt," the man called out. His voice was rough, like gravel. "Who's asking?" Caleb's voice was flat, cold as the air. "Name's Pike, Jonas Pike. I come from Cheyenne. I was given a message for you, or rather, for your new wife." Caleb's blood went cold. He saw Lily standing frozen by the chicken coop, a basket hanging from her hand. "A message from where?" Caleb asked. Pike spat a stream of tobacco onto the snow. "From Virginia. There's a man back east, a wealthy man. He's looking for a girl who ran away. A girl named Lily Ashcroft." Caleb Brandt shoved the $10 gold eagle across the stranger's palm. The man, Pike, looked at the coin, then at Caleb, and dropped it into his pocket. $500 is a lot of money. "Mr. Pike," Caleb said, his voice flat. He had met the man at the edge of his property line, well away from the cabin, well away from where Lily could hear. "It is," Pike agreed, his eyes scanning the ranch. "Mr. Vane is an impatient man. He wants what belongs to him." "This Lily Ashcroft," Caleb said, testing the name. "She is not here. My wife is Anna, from Ohio." Pike smiled, a cold movement of his lips. "Is she now? Well, you give Anna my regards, and you tell her, if she happens to run into this other girl, Silas Vane does not forget." He turned his horse. "I will be in Cheyenne for 2 weeks. After that, I am heading back east. $500. Brant, a man could build a herd with that." He rode off, leaving Caleb standing in the snow, the name Silas Vane echoing in his head. It was a name he knew, a name from the war, a black, poisoned name. He did not go back to the cabin. He went to the shed, saddled Ahab, and rode for Sweetwater Crossing. The shame of what he had done 2 nights before, taking her in the dark, in her sleep, was a sickness in his gut. But this new fear was colder. It was a fear he recognized. It was the fear of men like Vane. The ride to town was a long, cold misery. The snow was deep, the trail half gone. It took him half a day. He left Ahab at the livery and walked into the saloon. It was mid-afternoon, and the place was quiet. Just the bartender and 2 old prospectors playing checkers. He ordered a whiskey. A stranger passed through, Caleb said, his voice casual. Man named Pike. The bartender, a fleshy man named Silas, nodded. "Looking for some girl. Flashing a lot of cash." "What girl?" "Runaway from Virginia," the bartender said, wiping a glass. "You ain't the first to ask. He was in here yesterday, asking about new arrivals. Asking about you, Brant, about your new wife." Caleb's hand tightened on the glass. "I told him nothing," Silas said quickly. "Your business is yours. But Angus McPherson, he was in here. He heard the whole thing." McPherson, of course. What did Pike say about this girl? "Just that her family wants her back," Silas said. "But," he leaned closer, "the wire from Cheyenne. It tells a different story. I heard this story months ago. It ain't her family looking. It is a merchant, a man named Silas Vane. And the girl, she's trouble. They say she's a murderer. Burned down a manor house in Virginia. Killed a senator's son in the fire." Caleb felt the blood drain from his face. He remembered the fire. He remembered the smell of lamp oil and whiskey. He remembered the screams. "They say she did it out of spite," Silas continued, enjoying the gossip. "A lover's quarrel, but they hushed it up fast. Rich folks' problems. They say the girl was disfigured in the fire she set, marked, sent to an asylum. But she got out. Now Vane wants her." Caleb put the glass down, the whiskey untouched. He knew. He knew with a certainty that chilled his bones. Lily, blamed for the fire, blamed for the death of the senator's son. And Vane, the man he remembered from that night, the man with the cold eyes and the officer's smile, was the one pulling the strings. He turned and left the saloon. He rode back to the ranch, pushing Ahab through the deepening drifts as the sun set. He was riding not just against the cold, but against the past. When he reached the cabin, it was dark. No lamp was lit. A spike of pure fear shot through him. He burst through the door, his hand on his gun. "Lily?" The cabin was empty. The stove was cold. He ran to the shed, dread coiling in his stomach. He threw open the door. There she was. He saw her by the light of a single guttering lantern. She was in the stall with the dun mare, her back to him. She was on her knees in the hay. "Lily?" he said, his voice rough with relief and fear. She turned. She was not wearing her bonnet or veil. Her face was pale in the lantern light. She was not alone. On a pile of his old blankets, she was tending to an animal. It was a young coyote, its fur matted with ice and blood. One of its hind legs was a ruin of torn flesh, caught in the teeth of a rusted steel trap. "I found him by the creek," she whispered. She did not look at him. She was wiping the blood from the animal's fur with a wet rag. Caleb stared. The coyote was not fighting. It was lying still, its yellow eyes fixed on her, whimpering softly. "It's a wild animal. Lily, it will tear your hand off." "No, it will not," she said. Her voice was quiet, but firm. "The trap is stuck. I cannot get it open." He watched her, this woman who flinched from his touch, who hid her face from the world, now tending a wolf with her bare, scarred hands. The animal, which should have been snapping and growling, seemed to recognize something in her. A shared pain, a shared cage. Caleb stepped forward. He knelt beside her in the hay. "Hold him," he said. He took the rusted trap in his hands. The spring was thick with ice. He put his boot against one side, grabbed the other, and pulled. His muscles strained, the metal groaning in protest, until it finally popped open. Lily gently pulled the coyote's mangled leg free. The animal cried out, a high, thin sound, and tried to snap, but she put her hand on its head, murmuring, "Shh, it is all right. You are safe." The animal calmed, licking her scarred hand. Caleb sat back on his heels, the heavy trap in his lap. He looked at her, and the distance between them, the ice of the past week, seemed to shrink. He saw not the monster bride, not the victim, but a woman of impossible, quiet strength. They worked together. He fetched water. She cleaned the wound, her stiff fingers surprisingly deft. She bound it with a strip of linen torn from her own petticoat. "It will die if we leave it," she said. "It will stay in the shed," he agreed. "The mare does not seem to mind." They left the coyote on the blankets and walked back to the cabin. The silence between them was different. It was no longer empty. It was full. Inside, he built the fire up. The cabin was freezing. She sat at the table, her back to him, her hands clasped in her lap. The shame of 2 nights ago, his taking her, returned to him, sharp and heavy. "I went to town," he said, his back to her, poking the fire. She did not move. "I heard about Silas Vane." He saw her body go rigid. "They are looking for you. Lily, they are saying you set a fire, that you killed a man." She stood up so fast her chair scraped on the floor. "It is a lie." "Then tell me the truth," he said, turning to face her. "I have to know. Pike will be back. McPherson knows. They will put it together." "The truth?" Her voice was a low, trembling thing. "The truth is a story no one wants to hear." "I am asking." He took a step toward her. He felt a sudden, desperate need to break through the walls. "Lily, what happened to you?" He regretted the words as soon as he said them. He looked at her face, the scarred side. "What happened to your face?" It was as if he had struck her. She recoiled, a choked sob escaping her. "You want to know?" she whispered, her voice breaking. "You want to know what he did?" "Lily—" "He did this!" she screamed. It was not a whisper. It was a raw, broken sound that filled the small cabin. She tore the bonnet from her head, the one she had put back on, and threw it into the corner. "Look at me!" He looked. The scars were stark, red and puckered in the firelight. "It was Silas Vane," she said, tears streaming from her good eye. "Not the senator's son. That boy, Robert, he was just a fool, drunk and harmless. It was Vane. He was a merchant, supplying the armies. My father respected him. Vane, he wanted me." She was shaking, her hands clenched into fists. "My father refused him. That night, at the party, Vane, he found me in the library. He was drunk. He grabbed me. He said if my father would not give me to him, he would take me." Caleb's blood ran cold. He felt the echo of it, the memory of that night, the screams he had heard from outside the house. "I fought him," she choked out. "I hit him. I grabbed a lamp from the desk and I hit him." She was sobbing now, great, tearing gasps, but she did not stop. The lamp fell, the oil, the fire. It was so fast, the curtains. I tried to run, but he caught me. He held me. He said if he could not have my pretty face, no one would. He held me. She could not say it. She raised a shaking, scarred hand to her own cheek. "He held my face, to the fire. He held me there until I stopped screaming. Then he threw me on the floor and he ran." Caleb could not move. He felt as if the roof had collapsed on him. "He left me there to die," she whispered, sinking to her knees. Robert, the senator's son, he was passed out on the sofa. He never woke up. The smoke took him, and Vane told everyone I did it, that I set the fire because Robert spurned me. My family, they did not want the scandal. They disowned me. They sent me away. They called me mad. I have been running ever since." She huddled on the floor, a broken, weeping heap. He moved. He did not think. He crossed the room in 2 strides and knelt in front of her. She flinched, her hands flying up to cover her face. "Do not look at me." "Lily," he said. His voice was a rasp. He was shaking. He saw it. He saw the fire. He heard her scream. He had been there. He had been outside that library door. His captain had told him to stand post, to let no one in or out. He had heard the struggle. He had done nothing. He reached out his hand. It was calloused, scarred from work and war. She squeezed her eyes shut, trembling. He did not touch her hair. He did not touch her shoulder. He laid his rough palm very gently against her scars. She gasped, a long, shuddering breath. He felt the ruined, puckered skin beneath his touch. He felt the heat of her tears. She did not pull away. She leaned into his hand, as if she had been waiting for this touch her whole life. He knelt there, his hand cupping her jaw, and he looked at her. He saw all of it, the pain, the fire, the terror. "He will never," Caleb said, his voice thick with a vow that was 10 years too late, "touch you again." She opened her one good eye, and she saw him. She saw the rage in his face, but it was not directed at her. It was for her. She saw the guilt. She saw the man, not the monster. He leaned in, and he kissed her. He kissed the good side of her mouth. Then he moved, and he kissed the scarred corner, gently, deliberately. This time, when he kissed her, she kissed him back. It was not the fumbling, guilty act in the storm. This was a choice. This was 2 people, broken and raw, finding the only anchor they had. He lifted her. She was light in his arms. He carried her to the bed, and this time, he laid her down gently. There was no shame. There was only a quiet, desperate need. They undressed each other slowly. He saw the burns that marbled her shoulder and side. She saw the puckered bullet hole beneath his collarbone and the long, white scar that cut across his ribs. They were a map of their own private wars. He made love to her. It was slow. It was healing. He kissed her face, her hands, her shoulders. He whispered her name, not as a ghost, but as a prayer. He was trying to erase the memory of Vane, of the fire, of his own failure. She clung to him, her scarred hands gripping his back, and for the first time since Virginia, she felt a different kind of fire. It was not a fire that destroyed. It was a fire that burned clean. They lay tangled in the blankets afterward, the cabin silent save for the wind. The stove glowed, casting a warm, red light. She was asleep, her breathing deep and even, her head resting on his chest. He held her, feeling the light weight of her, and he knew he would kill any man who tried to take her from him. But the honesty between them was a new, sharp thing. It demanded all the truths. "Lily," he whispered, his hand stroking her hair. She stirred, murmuring in her sleep. "The sketch," he said, his voice quiet and heavy. "The drawing you found in my ledger." She tensed, her breathing catching. "It was not my cousin." She pulled back just enough to look up at him. "What?" "It was you." She stared at him, her good eye wide, uncomprehending. I do not understand. I knew you, Lily, before, in Virginia." The warmth drained from her face. She went utterly still. "What did you say?" "I was there," he said, the confession tearing out of him. "The day of the fire. I was a Union soldier. I was part of the detail at your house." He could not bring himself to say it was a raid. "I was the soldier who gave you water. By the well, that afternoon. She looked at him. He saw the memory dawn in her eye, the recognition, and then, immediately, the horror. "You," she whispered. She scrambled away from him, pulling the blanket up to her chin, backing against the cold sod wall. "You knew?" "Not when I signed the contract. I swear. Lily, I did not know until you stepped off that stage, until the veil lifted." "You knew who I was," she hissed, the words full of venom. "This whole time, you knew what happened to me." "I knew of it. I did not know the truth. Not until tonight." You were there," she said, her voice breaking. "You were there that night. I saw you. You were outside the library door when he—" "I was," he said, the shame burning his throat. "I was under orders. Lily, I heard you scream. You did nothing," she whispered. The accusation was absolute. "I could not—" "You did nothing!" she shrieked, the sound of betrayal ripping from her. "And now, you bought me? Was this it? Was this some plan? To find the broken girl and what? Fix her? Own her?" "No, it was a land contract. It was practical." "Practical?" She spat. She felt violated, more deeply than Vane had ever managed. Vane was an enemy. This was a betrayal of the soul. You knew how I was broken, and you touched me. Lily, it was not like that." "You lied to me!" She was sobbing, desperate, clawing at the blankets. "You are just like him. You just wanted what he wanted." "That is not true," he roared, sitting up. But she was already gone. She bolted from the bed, naked, and ran for the door. She grabbed her thin cloak from the floor. "Lily, stop! It is freezing! You will not survive!" She did not grab her boots. She did not grab her dress. She ripped the door open, the bolt screaming against the wood, and ran out into the moonlit snow. "Lily!" he cursed, throwing on his trousers and boots, grabbing his rifle. He did not stop for a coat. He ran out after her. The night was impossibly bright, the moon reflecting off an endless sea of white. He saw her, a dark shape struggling through the waist-deep drifts, heading for the ridge. She was a ghost in the snow. "Lily, come back! Damn it! You will die!" She fell, got up, and kept running, driven by a pain that numbed her to the cold. Then he heard it, the sound that every man on the frontier dreaded, a long, high howl, answered by another. He saw them, a pack of 5, gray shadows loping out from the dark line of the creek bed. They were gaunt, starved by the storm, and they saw her. "Wolves! Lily, get back!" She turned. She saw the shadows fanning out, closing the distance. She screamed, a thin, terrified sound, and fell, vanishing into a drift. The wolves circled, their forms dark against the white. Caleb was too far, 100 yards. He dropped to one knee, raised the rifle, but his hands were shaking. He could not get a clean shot. He fired into the air, above their heads. The gunshot cracked across the silent valley. The wolves paused. He ran, plunging through the snow, his lungs on fire. The alpha, a large male, ignored the sound and crept toward the drift where Lily had fallen. Caleb stopped, raised the rifle again, aimed at the alpha's shadow, and fired. The shot kicked up a plume of snow, inches from the wolf's head. The animal yelped and jumped back. The pack scattered, melting into the darkness. He reached her. She was trying to crawl, her cloak frozen stiff, her feet and legs already a dead, blue-white. She was shivering so violently her whole body convulsed. He did not speak. He did not apologize. He hauled her up, threw her over his shoulder, and began the brutal march back to the cabin. He kicked the door shut, bolted it, and dropped her on the blankets by the stove. She was almost unconscious, her teeth chattering, her skin like ice. "Fool," he gritted out, his voice raw with terror and rage. "You damn fool!" He worked with a desperate, grim speed. He tore the frozen cloak from her. He stripped off his own wet trousers. He carried her to the bed, threw every blanket they owned on top, and got in, pulling her back against his chest. He wrapped his body around hers, skin to skin, forcing his warmth into her. He held her, his arms locked around her waist, her head tucked under his chin. He held her as she shivered, as the first agonizing pain of life returned to her frozen limbs. He held her all night. He did not sleep. He just held her, breathing in the scent of her hair, guarding her from the cold, from the wolves, and from the ghosts he had helped create. She woke slowly, to the feeling of warmth. She was in the bed. She was naked. She was pressed tight against Caleb's bare chest. The memories of the night flooded back. The confession, the wolves, the betrayal. She tensed, trying to pull away. His arm, locked around her, tightened in his sleep. She lay still. She was alive. He had saved her. He had run into the night for her. He had held her and kept her from freezing to death. He stirred, his eyes opening. He looked down at her. The gray morning light filled the cabin. Her bonnet was gone. Her face, her scars, were completely visible. She felt the automatic burning shame and tried to turn her head away, to hide. He put his hand on her good cheek, his touch gentle, stopping her. He looked at her. He held her gaze. He saw the fear, the shame, and the betrayal. He did not speak. He leaned down. He kissed her forehead. He kissed her eyelid. Then, deliberately, he moved his head. He kissed the puckered, ruined skin at her temple. He kissed the long, silvery scar that pulled at her jaw. He kissed the corner of her mouth that could not smile. He kissed every mark the fire had left. Lily stopped breathing. A single tear tracked from her good eye, down her cheek, and onto his hand. The ice that had protected her for a decade finally, completely, melted. For 3 days, a fragile peace settled over the cabin. It was a peace born of shared trauma and the quiet, stunning intimacy of the morning after the wolves. Caleb had kissed her scars, and in doing so, had acknowledged every part of him that was scarred, too. They did not speak of what had happened, neither his confession nor his touch. Words were too clumsy for the raw new skin of their relationship. Instead, they spoke through action. He watched her. She no longer wore the bonnet or veil inside the cabin. She moved about in the daylight, her ruined face turned toward him. Not in defiance, but simply in existence. She did not hide. He looked at her, at the silvered pulls of skin, and felt none of the pity or revulsion she so feared. He felt only a low, thrumming hum of possession. She was his. They worked. He mended the harness for the wagon. She cooked, her stiff hands surprisingly capable with the dough. They went to the shed together to tend the coyote. Its leg was beginning to knit, the infection held at bay by her careful cleaning. The animal, which should have been wild with fear, lay still for her, its yellow eyes watching her every move. "You have a way with broken things," Caleb said, his voice quiet. He was leaning against the stall, watching her change the linen bandage. She looked up at him, her one good eye clear. "Or perhaps they just have a way with me." They slept in the same bed now. It was a practical decision. The cabin was cold, and they had shared the warmth against the wolf night. But it was more. He would lie on his back, and she would lie on her side, a careful foot of distance between them. Sometimes, in the deep of the night, he would wake to find her hand resting on his chest, a small, light weight, as if to make sure he was still there. He would cover her hand with his own and fall back asleep. The peace lasted until the 4th day. Caleb was splitting wood, the rhythm of the axe a comfort. Lily was inside, baking, the smell of fresh bread, A smell he had not known in this house drifted from the chimney. He heard the horse, not the shuffling gait of a tired pack animal, but the heavy, confident tread of a large horse, ridden hard. A man emerged from the line of melted snow and mud. He was not Pike. Pike was a messenger, wiry and nervous. This man was a different breed. He was heavy, wrapped in a greasy buffalo hide coat despite the warming air. A low-slung hat shadowed his face. He wore 2 pistols, crossed on his hips. He stopped his horse just at the edge of the yard where the men from town had stopped. But this man was not drunk, and he was not afraid. Caleb set the axe down. He did not wipe his hands. "Lily," he called, his voice low, but it carried, "Go inside. Bolt the door." The cabin door opened a crack. He saw her face, pale and questioning. "Do it, now!" The door shut. He heard the heavy thud of the wooden bolt. Caleb turned his full attention to the rider. The man smiled, revealing a row of yellowed, uneven teeth. "That her?" the man asked, his voice a wet rumble. "The little monster? She's as bad as they say." "You have 10 seconds to get off my land," Caleb said. "My name's Macon," the man said, ignoring him. He leaned forward, resting one thick arm on the pommel of his saddle. "I know your name's Brant, and I know who you got in there. I'm here for Lily Ashcroft." "There is no one here by that name." Macon laughed, a short, barking sound. "That's good. That's what Pike said you'd say, but Pike's just a message boy. I'm the man who gets the job done. Mr. Vane is a very important man, and he's tired of waiting. I told you to leave." "Pike offered you $500, Macon said, his voice dropping. "That was the price for bringing her. Mr. Vane has authorized me to offer $1,000. Caleb's vision narrowed. The trees, the cabin, the sky, it all faded to a red haze. "He does not care how she comes back," Macon continued, his smile widening, as if he knew the words he was about to say. "He wants her, but he told me, alive or dead. Frankly, dead is easier on the transport, and he'll still pay the full 1,000. The word dead hung in the air, a vile, black thing. Caleb did not go for his gun. He did not yell. He moved. He crossed the 10 feet between them in 2 strides. Before Macon could react, before his hand could even drop to his pistol, Caleb grabbed the man's thick leg in his coat and yanked. Macon, weighing over 200 pounds, was pulled clean from the saddle. He landed on his back in the half-frozen mud with a sound like a side of beef hitting a floor. The air left his lungs in a wheezing grunt. He clawed for his pistol. Caleb kicked it from his hand. Caleb knelt, straddling the man's chest. He looked down at the shocked, furious face, and he hit him. He hit him with a right hand, a blow driven by 10 years of guilt, a blow for the screams he had ignored. The sound of his fist on the man's jaw was a sharp, wet crack. Macon bellowed in pain and tried to heave him off. Caleb did not stop. He hit him again, in the mouth. He felt the man's teeth break under his knuckles. He hit him a 3rd time, and a 4th. It was not a fight. It was an execution. It was the violence he should have committed in that library in Virginia. It was for the fire, for the scars, for the lost baby, for the word dead. He grabbed the front of Macon's coat and slammed his head back into the mud. Once, twice. "She is not for sale," Caleb snarled, his voice a ragged whisper. Macon was a bloody ruin. His nose was broken, his mouth a mess. He was choking, trying to breathe. Caleb stood up, his chest heaving, his hands raw and bleeding. He grabbed the bounty hunter by the collar and dragged him through the mud to his horse. The horse, terrified, shied away. Caleb held it steady with one hand and, with a surge of pure adrenaline, threw the half-conscious man upward, slinging him face down over the saddle. He tore the man's rifle from its scabbard and threw it into the trees. He pulled the second pistol from its holster and did the same. "You go back," Caleb panted, his face inches from Macon's bloody ear. "You go back to Silas Vane. You tell him her name is Lily Brandt. She is my wife. You tell him if he ever sends another man here, I will not send him back. You tell him I will come for him. You tell him I know what he did. I know about the fire. You tell him I was there." He slapped the horse's rump, hard. The animal bolted, tearing off through the mud, carrying its broken rider back toward Cheyenne. Caleb stood there, shaking, covered in another man's blood. He looked at his hands, at his cut knuckles. He had done it. He had finally acted. He felt no pride, only a vast, cold emptiness. He turned. Lily was standing on the porch. The door was open. She held his rifle in her hands, her knuckles white. She had seen all of it. Her face was a mask of terror. He took a step toward her. "Lily." She flinched. The movement was a blade in his gut. He had just protected her, but the violence, his violence, had terrified her. He had become the monster to chase the other monsters away. He stopped. "He is gone." She lowered the rifle, her arms trembling. She did not speak. She just watched him as he walked past her into the cabin, dripping mud and blood onto the floor he had just swept that morning. He went to the wash basin, poured water from the bucket. His hands were shaking so badly he spilled half of it. He began, grimly, to wash. She followed him inside. She bolted the door. The sound was deafening in the silence. She came to him. She took the rag from his trembling hands. "Sit," she whispered. He sat at the table, his head bowed. He felt exhausted, emptied. She gently, silently, began to clean the blood and grime from his face. From the split in his own lip he had not even felt. Her touch was light, her scarred fingers impossibly gentle. "He will not be the last," Caleb said, his voice hollow. "Vane knows I was there." "What did you mean?" she asked, her voice barely audible. "What did you tell him?" He looked up at her. Her face was inches from his. He saw the fear in her good eye, but it was mixed with a desperate, sharp confusion. "What I told you, it was not the whole truth. It was a coward's truth." She stopped dabbing at his lip. "I was there," he said, his voice breaking. "I was not just outside. I was assigned to guard that door. My captain, a man named Wells. He was partners with Vane. They were using the raid as a cover to steal your father's coin. Vane went in there to convince your father, to threaten you." Lily's hand, the one holding the rag, fell to her side. "I heard it," Caleb whispered, the confession tearing him apart. "I heard him hit you. I heard the lamp break. I heard you scream." "You heard me," she repeated, the words toneless. "I tried to go in," he choked out, the memory searing him. "I put my hand on the doorknob, and Captain Wells, he was right behind me. He put his pistol to my head. He said, 'That is a rich man's business. Private. You are a soldier. You will follow your order, or I will put a bullet in your brain.' He told me to stand down, and I did." He looked at his hands, his bloody knuckles. "I was 22 years old. I was terrified, and I was a coward. I stood there. Lily, I stood right there, on the other side of that door. I heard the fire catch. I heard you scream. When he held you, I heard it all, and I did nothing." He finally looked at her. "I have heard that scream every night for 10 years. Lily stared at him. The man she thought was her savior was her first failure. She saw the anguish in his face, the self-loathing that carved lines deeper than any scar. She saw his shaking hands. She saw the blood he had just shed for her, a violence born of that one moment of terrible inaction. She realized he had not been living in this cabin. He had been living in that hallway. This ranch was not a home. It was a prison he had built for himself. He had been carrying this guilt, this single crushing moment, for his entire adult life. She did not feel anger. She did not feel betrayed. All she felt was a profound, bottomless sorrow. She wept. She put her hands on his shoulders. leaned her forehead against his, and she wept. Not for herself. For him, for the boy who had been forced to stand by, for the man he had become because of it. He broke you too, she whispered, her tears falling onto his face, mixing with the blood. He put his arms around her waist, pulling her close, burying his face in her stomach, holding onto her like a drowning man. They stayed like that, two broken pieces finally fitting together, the poison of their shared past finally drawn out. After a long time, she pulled back. She looked at his face, her hands cupping his jaw. Caleb, you did not know all of it. You do not know why I can never go back, not ever. He looked at her, his eyes raw. What? It was not just the fire, she said, her voice hollow. Dead. It was not just the scandal. When they sent me away to that place, the asylum, I was not just mad. I was with child. Caleb's hands, which were holding her, went rigid. Veins? He whispered, the name a curse. She gave a single, jerky nod, her good eye squeezing shut. The proof of my shame. My father. He could not have a ruined, monstrous daughter bearing a bastard. It was too much. They disowned me. They told the world I was dead. The baby. Caleb could barely form the words. She was born in that place. 6 months later. A girl. Lily's voice was flat, as if she were speaking of someone else. She was so small. She lived for 2 days. I held her, and then she was gone. She was the only thing I had, and she was part of him. She looked at him, her gaze empty. After she died, I was empty. I was nothing. I was a ghost, the preacher, his arrangement. It was a way out. It was a signature on a piece of paper. It was this, or the streets. I did not care who I married. I could not be Lily Ashcroft anymore. Caleb stared at her. The full, horrific scope of her tragedy finally clear. The fire, the scars, the assault, the child, the disownment. He had been drowning in his own guilt, but she had been surviving an apocalypse. He stood up, pulling her with him. The cabin was suddenly too small, suffocating. The air was thick with their confessions. He looked at her face, her beautiful, ruined face. He saw the violence he had just committed. He saw the ghost of the child she had lost. Lily saw the storm in his eyes. She saw the rage he felt for Vane, the fury that had no outlet. She saw the violence in his bloody knuckles, and she was not afraid of it. She wanted it. She needed to feel something other than the memory of a cold, dead baby. She needed to feel something other than the touch of Vane's hand or the pity in Caleb's eyes. She initiated it. Caleb, she whispered, her voice raw, desperate. She stepped into him, pressing her body against his. She put her scarred hands on his chest, feeling the frantic beat of his heart. Do not look at me like I am a ghost. Do not look at me with pity. He was shaking, confused by her sudden intensity. Lily, look at me, she demanded. She grabbed his bloody hand and brought it to her scarred cheek. Touch me. Not to heal me, not to save me. Just touch me. I am your wife. She was furious. She was desperate. She was alive. She needed to feel that life, to burn away the shame and the death. She pulled his head down and kissed him. It was not a gentle kiss. It was a biting, claiming, furious kiss. It was a demand for life. It was a scream against the past. Caleb groaned. The last of his restraint shattered. This, he understood. This rage, this desperate, clawing need. He gave in. He picked her up, his arms locking around her, and carried her to the bed. It was not slow. It was not healing. It was wild. It was a storm of passion, a desperate, angry claiming. He tore at her dress. She clawed at his shirt. It was a collision of two people fueled by 10 years of unsaid pain. It was rough. and it was filled with the ghosts of Vane and Wells and a dead child. He was claiming her from her past. She was claiming him from his guilt. It was a fire, and it burned and burned until the last of the shame was turned to ash. They lay afterward, gasping, sweat-soaked and exhausted, limbs tangled, the cabin in chaos around them. He was the first to speak, his voice a raw rasp. He will never stop looking. "I know," she whispered, her head on his chest. "We cannot run. This is our land. He will not take this too." "Then what?" He lay there, stroking her hair. "Then Lily Ashcroft has to die." She lifted her head, looking at him. "We have to kill her," he said, "for good." The next morning, the air was clear. The violence was gone, replaced by a cold, sharp resolve. They were a single unit. "We will fake your death," he said, pulling on his boots. He looked at her, his eyes clear for the first time. "We will make it look like you fled. After the bounty hunter. You ran, got lost. The wolves." "How?" "We need supplies," he said. "We need to go to town. We need lie, and we need to be seen. Together." He hitched the wagon. He stood, waiting. Lily came out of the cabin. She had brushed her dark hair until it shone. She had put on her one good dress, the simple blue wool. She was not wearing her bonnet. She was not wearing her veil. Her face, her scars, were open to the sun. He looked at her. He had never seen anyone more beautiful. He helped her up to the wagon seat. They rode, side by side, down the muddy track toward Sweetwater Crossing. The town was busy, people taking advantage of the thaw. When the wagon rolled down the main street, everything stopped. The blacksmith, the men outside the saloon, the women on the boardwalk, they all stopped. They stared. They saw Caleb Brandt, his face bruised, his lips split. And they saw his wife. They saw the monster bride in the full light of day. Whispers broke out. A low, cruel buzz. Women pulled their children away. Men nudged each other. Caleb pulled the wagon to a halt in front of the mercantile. He got down, his boots sucking at the mud. He turned. He looked up at Lily. She was trembling, her face pale, her gaze fixed on the wagon bed. She was staring at a wall of hatred. Caleb held up his hand, his calloused, bloody, farmer's hand. He offered it to her, publicly. She looked at his hand. She looked at the staring faces. She looked back at him. His eyes were steady. They held only her. She took a breath. She put her stiff, scarred hand into his. He laced his fingers with hers, holding her tight. He helped her down from the wagon. He did not let go. He held her hand as they stood in the mud. A woman, the preacher's wife, hurried past, shielding her young daughter's eyes. But one of the girls, a child of about 6, peeked out from behind her mother's skirt. She looked at Lily. She tilted her head, her gaze curious, not cruel. The child whispered, but the street was so quiet everyone heard it. "Mama, she's not ugly." Lily froze. The child continued, her voice clear. She's just sad." Lily looked at the child. A sound caught in her throat, and for the first time since she was a girl in Virginia, a smile touched her face. It was a small, hesitant thing. It was rusty from disuse. It pulled at the scarred skin, but it was a true smile. Caleb squeezed her hand. "Come on, wife," he said, his voice loud enough for all to hear. "We need supplies." He held her hand tightly, and together, they walked up onto the boardwalk and into the store. The town of Sweetwater Crossing did not just whisper. It festered. Caleb's beating of Macon had been a public act of war. The bounty hunter had limped to Cheyenne, a broken and bloody mess. And he had talked. He had told his story to anyone who would buy him a whiskey. He spoke of a $1,000 bounty, of a runaway murderer, of the savage rancher who was harboring her. The word came back to Sweetwater Crossing on the telegraph wire, and it lit a fuse. Angus McPherson, seeing his chance to oust Caleb for good, seized on it. He was not just a neighbor. He was a man who understood how to turn fear into a weapon. It was no longer about a woman with a scarred face. It was about a fugitive, a killer, a woman who had, they said, burned a man alive in his sleep. The fact that the man was a senator's son made it worse. The town, which had been merely suspicious, was now righteous. They were afraid. They were angry. They were a mob. They came on a Tuesday, late in the afternoon. Caleb smelled the smoke from their torches before he heard the horses. He stepped onto the porch, his rifle in his hand. Lily was right behind him, her face pale, but her hand steady. She held the shotgun he had taught her to load. There were 20 of them, maybe more. The blacksmith, the mercantile owner, the men from the saloon. And at their head, riding a tall gray horse, was a man Caleb knew better than any of them. Mayor Wells, the man who had been his captain, the man who had put a pistol to his head in a burning Virginia hallway. "Caleb Brandt," Wells called out, his voice the same crisp, authoritative tone he had used on the battlefield. "You are harboring a wanted fugitive. There is a warrant for her arrest out of Virginia." "You know that warrant is a lie, Wells," Caleb said, his voice low and cold. "I know what the law says," the mayor shot back. "We are a town of laws. You will turn the woman over. She will be held and sent back east to face trial." "She will not," Caleb said. "Do not be a fool, Brandt!" Wells's voice was sharp, impatient. "This is not some personal grievance. This is the law. Angus McPherson has filed a formal complaint. You are harboring a criminal. It invalidates your claim. We will have this land, and we will have the woman." "Her name," Caleb said, his voice dangerously quiet, "is Lily Brandt. She is my wife, and she is innocent." He looked at Wells, his gaze burning. "You know she is. You were there, Captain. You know Silas Vane set that fire. You know he is the one who should be hanging." The mob stirred, whispering. Wells's face hardened. He had not expected this. He had not expected the private in him to speak of that night. Wells laughed, a cold, sharp sound. "I was a captain in a war, Brandt. I do not remember every piece of camp gossip. I remember my duty, and I see a man ruining himself for a woman who is not worth the trouble. Look at her." He pointed a gloved finger at Lily, who flinched but did not lower the shotgun. "She is a broken woman," Wells yelled, his voice echoing across the yard. "Damaged goods. She has poisoned you. Brandt, she will be the end of you. Now step aside." The words "broken woman" landed in the quiet yard like a physical blow. Caleb felt Lily's breath hitch behind him. Caleb set his rifle down, leaning it gently against the porch rail. "You are right about one thing, Captain," Caleb said, his voice calm. He stepped off the porch and into the muddy yard, his hands open at his sides. "This is not about the law, and it is not about the land. It is about you, and it is about me. It is about the lie you have been living for 10 years. The mob quieted, sensing the shift. This was something older than a land dispute. "You were a coward in Virginia," Caleb said, his voice clear in the cold air. "You let an innocent girl be burned and blamed, all to protect your career, and you are a coward now." Wells' face went purple with rage. He swung down from his horse. "You are speaking to the mayor of this town, Brandt. I am speaking to the man who pointed a gun at my head while a woman screamed." Caleb said, "You will not hide behind these men. You will not hide behind a lie. You and I will settle this, the old way." Wessels hesitated. He looked at the faces of the men watching him, men who had elected him, who looked to him for strength. He could not back down. "What are you saying?" Wells hissed. "Sunrise," Caleb said. "At the creek. Pistols. Just you and me. If you win, You take my wife. You take my land. But if I win, you tell them the truth. You tell them all what Silas Vane did, and you leave us in peace." It was a challenge Wells could not refuse. To do so would be to admit cowardice, to admit the truth of Caleb's words. "You are a fool, Brant." Wells spat. "You were a fool in the army, and you are a fool now. Sunrise it is." He turned, mounted his horse, and led the silent, stunned mob away. The cabin was suffocating. The bolt was thrown, but it offered no protection. The air was thick with the coming dawn. Lily was frantic. She was throwing things into a canvas sack, dried meat, ammunition, a blanket. "We can go," she said, her voice tight with terror. "We can leave right now. We can ride north. We can still do the plan. We can fake my death in the mountains. He will never find us." Caleb was at the table, his face illuminated by the single lamp. He was methodically, carefully, cleaning his Colt pistol, the cylinder, the barrel, the trigger. "Caleb, did you hear me?" she pleaded, her hands shaking. "He will kill you. He is a captain. He has been in a dozen duels. You are a rancher." "I was a soldier first," Caleb said, not looking up. He slid a bullet into a chamber. Click. "This is not a war. This is pride. This is for nothing." Click. He loaded the second chamber. "Please," she whispered, coming to him, her hands on his shoulders. "Do not do this. Do not leave me. I cannot be alone again." He stopped. He put the pistol down. He covered her hands with his own, his knuckles still scarred from the fight with Macon. "Lily," he said, his voice quiet. He turned on the bench to face her. "That night, in Virginia, I did nothing. I chose to live. I chose my own fear over your life. I have lived with that choice every single day." He looked into her eyes, his own filled with a terrible, calm resolve. "I am not that man anymore. Running, that is what he would do. Hiding, that is what he would do. I will not stand by and let a coward like Wells take my wife and my home. I will not. I am done doing nothing." "But I will lose you," she wept, her forehead sinking to his chest. "You will not," he said, holding her. "This is the only way to end it. It is the only way to kill the ghost. For both of us." He held her for a long time. He kissed her hair. "Go to sleep," he said. "I will not sleep," she replied. She sat in the chair opposite him, watching him, and together, they waited for the dawn. The creek was a line of dark, icy water cutting through the snow-dusted plains. The entire town was there, a dark semicircle of silent spectators. Reverend Mills stood to the side, his Bible clutched in his hands, his face pale and sick. Caleb and Wells faced each other. They had removed their coats. Caleb was in his shirt sleeves, the cold air biting at his skin. "The rules are simple," the blacksmith said, his voice rough. 10 paces. Turn. Fire." Lily watched from the wagon, her hands clenched so tight her scarred knuckles were white. Caleb looked at her. One last time. She was his. He would not lose her. They paced. 1. The mud sucked at his boots. 2. He thought of the fire. 3. He heard her scream. 4. Wells' pistol at his head. 5. The word broken. 6. Her hand in his. 7. Her smile. 8. The wolves. 9. Her face in the morning light. 10. He stopped. He turned. Wells was fast. He was a trained officer. His pistol was up, leveled. The 2 shots were a single, deafening crack that echoed off the ridge. Caleb felt a white-hot agony tear through his left side, just below his ribs. It felt like a mule had kicked him. The force of it spun him around, and he fell to one knee, gasping, the world turning gray at the edges. He heard Lily scream his name. He looked up. Wells was still standing. He had a look of triumph on his face, a cold, thin smile. Then The smile wavered. Wells looked down. A small, dark circle was spreading over his white shirt, right over his heart. He touched it, his glove coming away red. He looked at Caleb, his expression not of anger, but of complete, stunned surprise. "Damn you, Brant," he whispered. He fell forward, face first, into the mud. Silence. The town was frozen. Caleb tried to stand. The pain was blinding. He pushed himself up, clutching his side. Blood was pouring through his fingers, a hot, shocking flood. Lily was running to him, scrambling through the mud, her skirts soaked. "Caleb! Oh, God, Caleb!" He stumbled, but he did not fall. He walked, one heavy step at a time, toward the man he had just killed. He collapsed to his knees beside Wells's body. Wells was still breathing, shallow, ragged gasps. His eyes were open, staring at the gray sky. "Caleb!" Lily cried, trying to put her hands on his wound, but he pushed her gently away. He grabbed the front of Wells's shirt. He hauled the man's head and shoulders out of the mud. "Tell them," Caleb snarled, his voice thick with pain. "Tell them, before God." Wells looked at him. The arrogance was gone. There was only fear. He looked past Caleb, at the faces of the townspeople who were creeping closer. He is right," Wells choked, a bubble of blood appearing at his lips. "It was Vane, Silas Vane." The crowd gasped. "The fire! It was Vane. He assaulted the girl. He said it to cover his theft." Lily was sobbing, her hands over her mouth. "Why?" Caleb gritted out. "Why did you protect him? Why did you let the lie stand?" Wells's gaze found Caleb's. His eyes were fading. "Vane, he was powerful. He had the supply contracts. He would have ruined me. The girl, she was just a girl. It was my career, His head lolled back. His eyes went vacant. He was dead. Caleb let him fall. He had the confession. He had the truth. He looked at Lily. He told them. He whispered. Then the strength left him, and he pitched forward, unconscious, into her arms. He woke to pain, a sharp, searing line of fire in his side. He was in their bed. The cabin was warm. The sun was low, casting long shadows. He smelled antiseptic and soap. Lily was beside him, her face stained with tears, but her expression fierce. She was holding a needle and a thread of dark catgut. His shirt was gone. His side was a mess of raw flesh and blood. "The bullet!" he rasped. "It hit a rib," she said, her voice shaking but controlled. It shattered the bone. I got most of the fragments, but it is deep. Caleb, I have to close it." He nodded, gritting his teeth. He watched her. He watched her scarred. Stiff fingers deftly pull the needle through his skin. She did not flinch. She worked with a grim, focused precision. The girl who had been raised to pour tea was saving his life. She worked for an hour, stitching the long, ragged tear in his flesh. He did not make a sound. He just watched her face. When she was finished, she tied the last knot and cut the thread. Her hands were covered in his blood. She slumped, exhausted. "You should have run," he whispered. "You should have taken the wagon and gone." She looked at him, her good eye blazing with a fire he had never seen before. "No, I am done running. Caleb, I told you, I do not care if Vane sends the entire Union Army. This is my home. You are my husband. I am not running anymore." He reached out, his hand shaking, and touched her cheek. "Lily." She stood up. She walked to his coat, which was hanging by the door. She reached into the pocket and pulled out the crumpled bounty letter, the one from Pike. The one that described her as a fugitive and offered $500 for her return. She walked to the stove and opened the iron grate. The fire inside was burning low. "Lily Ashcroft died in Virginia," she said, her voice clear. "Silas Vane killed her. My family buried her. This is just a piece of paper." She dropped it into the flames. They watched it together. The edges curled, the ink blackened, and the name Lily Ashcroft turned to gray ash and vanished. That night, the snows returned. Not a blizzard, but a soft, gentle fall that muffled the world, burying the duel, the blood, and the lies. Caleb was weak, feverish, but the worst had passed. Lily had cleaned him, changed his bandages, and forced broth between his lips. He was lying in the bed, propped up on pillows. She sat on the edge of the bed, her work for the night done. The cabin was quiet, just the hiss of the snow and the crackle of the fire. She looked at him. He looked at her. The space between them was no longer filled with ghosts, or guilt, or fear. It was just them. She reached out, her hand hesitant. She traced the line of the new stitches on his side, a stark, black line against his pale skin. "Another scar," she whispered. "I have a few," he rasped. Her hand moved up. She touched the old, puckered bullet hole beneath his collarbone. She touched the long, white scar from the saber that cut through his ribs. He watched her. He saw the acceptance in her touch. He saw the love. He raised his own hand, the one that was not cut and bruised. He touched her face. He laid his palm against her scars, the one she had hidden for so long. "You are beautiful, Lily," he whispered. He meant it. He saw the fire. He saw the pain. But he no longer saw the ruin. He saw the strength. He saw the woman who had faced down a mob, who had saved him from bleeding to death. She leaned into his hand, her good eye closing, tears slipping from beneath the lid. She leaned in, and she kissed him. It was not the desperate, angry passion of their last encounter. It was not the fumbling guilt of their first. It was slow. It was gentle. It was a promise. She carefully, mindful of his wound, lay down beside him on the bed. They made love, slowly, quietly, as equals. It was a confirmation, a sealing of the truth. She touched his scars. He kissed hers. There were no more walls. Afterward, they lay in the warmth, the snow falling outside the window. "Lily," he said, his voice quiet. "I am here." In the pocket of my coat, the other one, the inside pocket. She slipped out of bed, wrapped a blanket around herself, and went to his coat. She felt inside and found a folded piece of paper. She brought it back to the lamp. It was the deed to the ranch. She opened it. She read the names, filed just yesterday by a very pale, very accommodating Reverend Mills. Caleb Brandt and Lily Brandt. "Job," she whispered, her voice thick. I do not understand." "You came here as a purchase," he said, his voice tired but strong. "You came here to save my land, but you saved me. The land is yours. Lily, it was always meant to be yours." She sank to her knees by the bed. The deed clutched in her hand and rested her head on his chest, listening to the steady, strong beat of his heart. Spring did not come to Wyoming. It fought its way in. The thaw was a brutal, muddy siege. The world, which had been a solid, silent white, turned into a vast brown ocean of sucking mud and ice-choked water. The creek behind the cabin, which had been a dry-sod gash when Lily arrived, became a roaring, angry torrent. The snow did not melt. It rotted from the ground up, revealing the bruised, matted-down grasses of the plains. Caleb's wound healed with the land. In the first weeks after the duel, he was a prisoner of the bed, weak with fever, his breath catching on the pain of his shattered rib. Lily did not leave his side. She was a general in a war against infection. She boiled bandages, cleaned the wound with whiskey when the antiseptic ran out, and forced broth and willow bark tea down his throat. She was tireless. She held his hand when the fever dreams took him back to Virginia, her quiet presence a shield against the ghosts. He watched her. He had seen her as a victim, as a survivor, and as a lover. Now he saw her as a wife. When he was finally able to stand, leaning on her small, strong shoulder, the world was changing. The mud began to dry, and a pale, watery green pushed through the brown. The air, which had been a sterile, sharp cold, softened. It carried new smells, damp earth, the sweetness of budding sage, the distant promise of rain. He sat on the porch step, whittling, regaining the strength in his hands. He watched her. Lily had transformed. The winter had been a cocoon, and the woman who emerged was not the one who had hidden beneath a green veil. She was strong. The daily work, hauling water, chopping kindling, tending the animals, had put lean muscle on her thin frame. Her skin, once pale and protected, was now browned by the wind and the sun. She wore her scars as simply as she wore her dress. She worked beside him, not behind him. When he was strong enough to plow a small patch for a garden, she was there, not guiding the plow, but breaking the hard clods of earth with a hoe. Her movements rhythmic and powerful. She had a laugh. It was a quiet, rusty sound, but he heard it when she fed the chickens, or when the dun mare nudged her shoulder. The coyote, whose leg she had set, had healed. It had lived in the shed for 2 months, a wild, yellow-eyed shadow that ate from her hand and her hand only. One morning in April, she opened the shed door. The coyote limped out, tested its leg, and looked back at her. "You are safe now," she whispered. It watched her for a long minute, then turned and loped, with only a slight hitch in its gait, toward the ridge. It did not look back. Caleb came to stand beside her. "You saved it." "We saved each other, I think," she said, wiping her hands on her apron. "It is good to see something heal and run free." The town of Sweetwater Crossing had been rocked by Mayor Wells's confession. The truth, spoken from a dying man's lips, could not be undone. The town's righteous anger had curdled into a collective, unspoken shame. They did not apologize. That was not the way of the frontier. Instead, the world shifted in small, almost invisible ways. When Caleb and Lily rode into town for supplies, the whispers were gone. The stares were still there, but they were no longer cruel. They were curious. They were respectful. The blacksmith, Mr. Ayers, who had been part of the mob, stopped Caleb by the wagon. "Heard you had trouble with that axle. Brant, bring it by. I will see to it." He did not mention a price. The mercantile owner, whose wife had pulled her children away, now nodded to Lily as she entered. "Mrs. Brant, we got in some new calico cloth from St. Louis. Thought you might like to see it." Lily, holding her list, her head held high, looked at the bolts of fabric. She touched a soft blue-patterned cloth. "It is lovely. Mr. Henderson, I will take 2 yards." It was a normal, simple transaction. A woman buying cloth. For Lily, it was a miracle. It was the first time she had been treated not as a monster, or a victim, or a fugitive, but as a wife, as a neighbor. Angus McPherson had vanished. The day after the duel, he had sold his herd for a fraction of its worth, signed his claim over to the land office, and taken the stage east. The land to the west of them, his ranch, now lay silent. The threat was gone. The true end came not with a gunshot, but with the mail. Reverend Mills rode out to the ranch in early May. He looked thinner, older, the duel having shaken his faith in the civility he was trying to build. He held a single, thick envelope. It was addressed to Mrs. Lily Brant, care of Sweetwater Crossing, Wyoming Territory. "It came on the high stage," he said, his eyes avoiding hers. "It is from an attorney in Virginia." Caleb took it. He felt Lily's hand grip his arm, her fingers cold. The past, which they had buried, had just clawed its way back. "Thank you, Reverend," Caleb said. his voice flat. He walked the preacher back to his horse. When he was gone, Caleb and Lily stood on the porch. The letter felt heavy, like a stone. "You should open it," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I cannot." He broke the wax seal. His hands, steady in a gunfight, shook. He unfolded the heavy, cream-colored paper. It was not a warrant. It was a legal notice. He read it silently, his lips moving. Then he read it again. "To be sure." "Caleb." "He is dead," Caleb said, his voice numb. "Who?" "Silas Vane. He died 6 weeks ago. In his office. An apoplectic fit." "A stroke," Caleb translated. "He died at his desk. He was a very wealthy man." Lily put her hand over her mouth. "Dead." "His estate is in chaos," Caleb continued, scanning the legal terms. "There are creditors. This attorney, he is the executor. He says all of Vane's personal effects are being liquidated, including all outstanding private contracts and bounties." He looked at her. "It is over, Lily. The warrant was based on his word, his personal influence. With him dead, the state has no interest. The case is closed. The bounty is void." He let the paper drop from his hand. It fluttered to the porch. Lily did not speak. She did not cry. She looked at the letter, lying in the dust. Then she turned. She stepped off the porch. She began to walk, slowly at first, past the new garden, past the clothes line. She walked toward the ridge, where the land rose up to meet the endless sky. Her walk became a stumble, and then a run. She ran, her skirts flying, her dark hair coming undone from its bun. She ran as if the wolves were behind her, as if the fire was at her back. Caleb followed, keeping his distance. He knew she did not need him to hold her. She needed to do this alone. He watched as she reached the crest of the ridge. The wind was strong up there, pulling at her dress. The entire world was spread out before her, miles and miles of greening plains, the snow-capped mountains to the west, the clean blue bowl of the sky. She fell to her knees. She sank into a thick patch of wild Indian paintbrush and blue lupine, and she wept. It was not the silent, terrified sobbing he had heard in the dark cabin. It was not the broken, ragged weeping of her confession. It was a great, tearing, cleansing sound. It was the wail of a girl who had lost her home, her family, her face, her child. It was 10 years of unspeakable terror, of shame, of loneliness, pouring out of her and into the soil of this new, hard land. Caleb stood 20 yards back, his hat in his hand, his heart breaking for her. He let her cry. He let the wind take the sound. He stood guard, a silent sentinel, as his wife finally, truly, let the past go. She cried until the sun began to dip, until the air grew cool. When she was done, she was empty, scoured clean. She rose, her face blotched, her eyes swollen, but she was straighter than he had ever seen her. She walked back to him, her steps certain. She stopped in front of him. "He is dead," she whispered. "He is," Caleb said. "I am free." "You are," he said. She touched the rough cloth of his shirt. "I want to build a house," she said, her voice hoarse. "We have a house. Lily." "No," she said, turning to look back at the sod cabin, sitting low in the hollow. "That is a shelter. That is a place to hide from storms. I want a home. Up here." She pointed to the ridge. "Where I can see the sun come up. Where I can see for miles." She looked where she was pointing. He saw it. A house with windows. A house that was not afraid of the wind. "Then we will build it," he said. They spent the summer building. He felled the trees himself, in the high country, and hauled the timber down. He built the foundation from river stone, digging it deep into the ridge. It was not his house. It was theirs. Lily was there every day. She learned to mix the mud and straw for the chinking. She learned to hold the timbers steady while he set them. Her scarred, stiff hands grew calloused and strong. She worked with the quiet, joyful intensity of a woman building her own life. The cabin had been one dark room. The new house had three. A main room with a wide, proper stone fireplace, big enough to stand in, a bedroom, and a small third room, a pantry. Caleb had called it, but he had put a window in it. By the time the first aspen leaves turned yellow, they were living on the ridge. The view was, as she had promised, endless. They could see the weather coming from 50 miles away. They could see the sun rise over the plains and set over the mountains. The sod cabin, down in the hollow. They left to the elements. It was a monument to the winter they had survived. Their first public act as Mr. and Mrs. Brant of the new ranch was an invitation. The neighbors whose daughter, Sarah, had first spoken to Lily in town, were having a wedding. The girl was marrying a young ranch hand from Cheyenne. "They want us to come," Lily said, holding the small, handwritten card. She was terrified. This was not the mercantile. This was a party, a celebration. "Do you want to go?" Caleb asked. She looked at her reflection in the new glass pane he had hauled from Cheyenne. She saw her face, the brown skin, the clear good eye, the silvered map of her past. "Yes," she said, "I do." She wore the blue calico dress. She brushed her hair and tied it back with a simple ribbon. Caleb, scrubbed clean, wore his one good shirt. He watched her at the door. "Your bonnet?" he asked. She touched her face, then looked at him. "No," she said, "I do not think I need it anymore." They rode to the neighbor's ranch, not in the farm wagon, but with Caleb on Ahab and Lily on the dun mare. They arrived side by side. The party was in the yard. A fiddler was playing. People were laughing. When they rode in, the fiddle faltered. The laughter died. It was the test. Caleb swung down and, in front of everyone, turned to help his wife. He held his hands up, and she placed hers on his shoulders, sliding down. The neighbor, Sarah's father, came forward, his hand out. "Brant, glad you could make it." He nodded to Lily, his eyes respectful. "Ma'am, it is an honor to have you." And just like that, the ice was broken. The fiddle started again. People turned back to their conversations. A woman, the preacher's wife, came up to Lily. "Mrs. Brant, Sarah is so glad you are here. She speaks of you. She says you are the bravest woman in the territory." She blushed. "Please, will you have some cake?" Lily, her hand tucked into the crook of her husband's arm, her scars open to the afternoon sun, smiled. "Thank you, Mrs. Mills. I would love some." No one stared. No one whispered. No one dared. She was not the monster bride. She was Mrs. Brant, the rancher's wife, who had survived a bounty hunter in a duel. She was, they had decided, one of them. The ghost of her lost child was laid to rest that winter. A blizzard, sudden and vicious, swept through in early November. It trapped a young couple, homesteaders from the east, in a high pass. The husband, a man they had never met, was found frozen. His wife, delirious with fever and grief, had given birth in their snowbound wagon. By the time the news reached town, the mother was dead. Reverend Mills and his wife brought the child to the ridge. They knew it was the only place to go. Lily opened the door to their knock. Mrs. Mills, her face grim, held out a bundle of blankets. She is all that is left," the woman whispered. We do not have room, and we thought of you, of this house." Lily looked at the bundle. A tiny, red, furious face peeked out. A baby girl, no more than 3 days old. Caleb came to stand behind his wife. He put his hands on her shoulders. He felt her trembling. He knew what this would cost her, what memories it would bring back. Lily looked at the child. She saw the snow on the blankets. She thought of a cold room in an asylum. She thought of a baby who had lived for 2 days. She reached out her scarred hands. She did not hesitate. "What is her name?" Lily asked. She has none." "Mrs." Mills said, tears in her eyes. "Her mother died before she could—" "Her name is Hope," Lily said, her voice fierce. She took the baby and pulled her close, tucking the bundle against her heart. "Her name is Hope, and she is home." She turned from the door, carrying the child, and Caleb bolted it against the wind. That night, the wind howled. It was a high, thin scream, the same sound that had terrified her in the sod cabin. But here, in the new house, it was different. It was just the wind. It could not get in. The baby, Hope, slept in a cradle that Caleb had built and placed in the small room with the window. Caleb and Lily sat by their fire, the stone hearth radiating a deep, steady warmth. He was mending a piece of harness. She was knitting a small, soft blanket. They were quiet, content. The sound of the wind was a soft, lonely song outside. Lily paused in her knitting. She looked into the flames. "Caleb," she whispered. "I am here." She turned to him, her face soft in the firelight. "Do you remember," she asked, "the girl you once tried to save? The girl in the sketch?" He stopped his work. He looked at her. He saw the girl from Virginia, the veiled bride from the stagecoach, the woman who had faced down a mob, the mother holding her new child. They were all there. He reached across the small space between them and put his hand over hers. "I have been saving her every day since," he replied. She smiled. He leaned in, and they kissed. It was a slow, deep kiss of people who had no more words to say, no more ghosts to fight. The wind howled softly outside, but inside, by the fire, 2 ghosts who had been forged in fire and bound by scars were finally at rest. They were home. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I truly hope it touched your heart. My name is From Wild West, and I love bringing these tales of the frontier to life. If you enjoyed the story, please consider subscribing. I would love to know where you are listening from, so drop a comment and say hello. And please, share your thoughts on Caleb and Lily's journey. What was your favorite part? All your comments help this channel grow. Thank you again, and until the next story.